Thank you very much, Mr. Chauhan. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a watershed year in Indian politics. With the new government at the center and the just sworn in the state, there's an afterglow of that euphoria in this venue as well. That's because our chief guest represents the ruling party, the BJP, having won the Hazaribagh Lok Sabha seat in Jharkhand by a thumping margin of 1,60,000 votes. In Parliament, he represents a constituency of some 2.5 million people. A respected member of his party, he serves on key parliamentary committees and is a BJP spokesperson on economic and business matters. He's also been selected to represent the Asia-Pacific Group on the Inter-Parliamentary Union Subcommittee on Sustainable Development, Finance and Trade. Prior to his career in public service, he was a partner and managing director at Omidyar Network, serving on its 5-member Global Executive Committee. His rich experience of over 25 years in investing and strategic consulting has seen him serve on the boards around the globe. An expert on IT, BPO, and telecom, he's authored influential reports besides serving in advisory capacities to the government. Such is his pedigree, distinguished global publications have quoted as well as published him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a resume that runs so deep and weighty, I haven't even scratched its surface. Suffice to say that it's an extreme privilege to be addressed tonight by one whose professional and public career alike have been characterized by the proverbial Midas touch. Please welcome our tonight's chief guest, Member of Parliament, Shri Jayant Sinha.
Thank you very much. So I'm here with you today. The new government is being sworn in Maharashtra right now. The stock market is up 500 points and it's a lifetime high. Is there a coincidence here? I think the times are good for India. Mr. Sampath, Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan, friends from the broking industry, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the cusp of something very historic for India. And I'm very glad I have a chance to speak to you all about all of that. And so what I thought today I would do is to talk a little bit about the economic situation that we found ourselves in when we took over and took charge of this very historic and decisive electoral mandate that we had, which is what was the context? What is it that we found when we took over? So I think I'll spend a little bit of time on that. Then I'll talk to you a little bit about our economic philosophy and what is it that we are doing to really power the economy forward. And then finally, I will speak a little bit about what I think the impact of all of this is going to be in your lives, but also for where India is headed. So those are the 3 topics I thought I would cover. We do have 10 or 15 minutes for questions as well, so I'd be very happy to take any controversial, difficult questions that you might have. It's always fun to do that, so I'm hoping that you have some good questions you can ask. So let me start with the context, which is what was the situation we found ourselves in when we took charge on the 26th of May and the government was sworn in. The fact is that the economy that we confronted in May when we took over was the worst it had been in 25 years. Now you all know the economic parameters, you know the numbers, you know that GDP growth rate in India for the last 2 fiscal years had been below 5%. This has not happened in 25 years. In 25 years, we've not had 2 consecutive years of less than 5% GDP growth. So that was the state of the GDP growth rate. Inflation had been running at more than 10% for 5 sustained years. This was the worst inflationary environment of any major economy in the world. That was the situation that we inherited as far as inflation was concerned. And third, you all know what had happened to the current account deficit. You know what had happened in the August of 2013 when we had a near sort of panic in the currency markets, the rupee, of course, getting to 68 and so on. So that was the nature of the economy that we inherited when we took power in May 2014, just a few short months ago. Now, that in itself is bad enough. And these are the big numbers that everyone looks out and looks at very closely. But ladies and gentlemen, what was worse and what was far more damaging to the economy and your future prospects was the institutional decay and the institutional denigration and degradation that we found when we took over. I don't have to explain to you the problems that existed as far as coal allocation is concerned. Those have been in the papers and are in front of you. Similarly, if you look at telecom spectrum, major mess that we inherited there. Judicial appointments, another major problem that we had to confront with. And if you go down the list and you look at institution after institution, every single institution we found had been defiled, corrupted, and hollowed out to the extent that when we took over and we said, let's get things going, it was very difficult to have confidence in the institutions of governance. And that was the more damaging, more difficult problem that we confronted when we took over. And the net result of those two, the net result of the very poor economic performance and the net result of these institutions which had been corrupted and defiled was that business, consumers, both in India and around the world, had lost confidence in the Indian economy. There was no confidence in the Indian economy. No, there was no confidence in the management of the Indian economy. And you saw that in terms of the FII flows that were coming in, the FDI flows that were coming in, and most importantly, you saw that in terms of domestic investment that plunged. This was the situation that we confronted. I'll give you a simple example. While we talk about the coal allocation, we talk about the fact that spectrum allocation was a major problem and we've had to try and fix all of that. Land acquisition was a major problem. There were little things even that had not been taken care of. When I entered Parliament as a first-time MP and somebody who had, of course, spent 25, 28 years in the private sector, I said, I'm in Parliament. I have to be online. Let me see where I can plug in my computer. I couldn't find a place to plug in my computer and recharge it. The Wi-Fi network in Parliament did not work. Now, these are little simple things, but they point to the underlying malaise and the underlying decay in our institutions, where an important institution like Parliament, in its IT infrastructure, had simply not been upgraded. So this is a lot of what we've had to do. It's called remedial work. We've had to do a lot of remedial work to deal with these institutions. And I'll remind you of a very interesting story in Alice in Wonderland. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice goes to the Red Queen. And she finds the Red Queen, standing in one place and running very hard, running very hard. And she says, my goodness, you're running very hard, but you're not moving, you're just staying in one place. And so the Red Queen tells Alice, she says, yes, that's the way of the world these days. That's the way of the world. You have to run very hard to stay in one place. And the moral of that story is that in today's day and age, and of course, Mr. Chauhan was giving you all these fabulous statistics about all the incredible things that BSE has been able to do just in the last year. That's an example of all the work you have to do to just stay in one place, given the competition and the technology changes that you deal with. So when you have a situation where our institutions of governance have not been upgraded, instead of just stagnating, which is staying in place, if you're not running very fast, you don't just stagnate, you go further and further behind. You fall further behind. And so what we've had over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, unfortunately, is that our economy and our institutions have not just stagnated, they've regressed, relatively speaking. And that is the challenge we had to confront with. That is the context we have to deal with. And so when we took over, we realized that we had to deal with it in 2 or 3 different ways. The first and most important thing, which I think, the decisive electoral mandate, resulted in, was to reassure investors, business people, to change sentiment and to ensure people that they had, and assure them fully that they had, so that they would have confidence in the government, confidence in the economic management of the country. And I think to a large extent, and you can see that in where the stock market is today, you can see that in the number of business people coming to visit India, you can see that with what our business people are saying, and I think what you all are feeling. I think you can sense that in your own hearts, you can sense it from what you're feeling, is that sentiment has changed. Sentiment has genuinely changed. We can all really appreciate that. But then we come to the second aspect of what needed to get done, which was to basically fix a lot of low-hanging fruit, take care of that, so that we could at least make some of the important decisions that had to be done so that the economy could at least begin to start moving. And we've done quite a bit of that, and I will explain that in detail. And then the third aspect of what we've had to do, which is what we're really working on right now, which is the deep structural things that need to get fixed in the economy. And I will describe what those are right now. But let me step back for a second and tell you a little bit about the whole nature of reforms. When you read a lot of the media, particularly some of the global media, everybody says, well, where are the big ticket reforms? Where are the big ticket reforms? Why isn't it that you're doing more? And there are two very important aspects to that statement which I think are quite wrong, which are factually incorrect. The first problem is that it's like the drunk who was looking for his house keys under the lamppost. You heard that story? The drunk looking for his keys under the lamppost? So what happens is that the drunk is just looking under the lamppost for his keys, because when somebody went and asked him, why are you doing that? He said, well, that's where the light is. That's why I'm looking for it over there, right? And it's a little bit of the problem with the media is the same, because the media continues to just look at 4 or 5 things and say, if you haven't done those 4 or 5 things, you haven't done the big ticket reform. Because that's where the light is. That's all they know, so they keep looking at those 4 or 5 things. That's wrong. That's one very important aspect of this big ticket reform. Where's the big ticket reform? The second very important aspect of misunderstanding that is to think that this is, and of course, you know, Ms. Chauhan was the manager of an IPL team, so he'll be quite upset with me for saying this. But, you know, T20 matches are not all that it's about. So we are not playing a T20 match. We don't feel like we've got to hit every ball for a 6. We've got 5 years. And inshallah, God willing, with your support, we might have even 10 years, maybe even 15 years. So if we have that thinking, if we have that as our planning horizon, there is no reason to try and hit every ball for a 6. So as we think about reforms, we are doing it systematically, we are doing it methodically, and I think overall the net result will be something that will really pay off big time in the long run. So number one, when we think about reforms and we think about big ticket reforms, let's not go through the tired cliches. I'll tell you what the tired cliches are, which is the lamppost and the drunk looking for his keys. And let's understand that we have really embarked on a 5 or 10-year effort at nation building. Once you understand those aspects of this question of big ticket reform, you'll realize that what we're doing makes a tremendous amount of sense. So let me go through and explain some of the big things that we're doing as far as reform is concerned. But even before that, let's also recognize that for whatever reason, as I said, the lamppost and the keys, the media has a list of 5 that they always bring out and say, if you're not doing these 5, you're not doing big ticket reforms. So what are the 5 things that the media always talks about? The media always talks about, well, what are you doing about retroactive taxation? What are you doing about labor reform? What are you doing about land acquisition and reform there? What are you doing about FDI insurance? And what are you doing about FDI in multi-brand retail? For whatever reason, maybe it's because they all read The Economist or the Financial Times or whatever it is. Every time we talk about reform, these are the 5 cliches that are always brought up. And I think they're just, you know, not looking in the right places. Actually, what we've done is much more important and much more compelling than this tired list of 5 that people keep bringing up. Let me go down the list and tell you 10 massively important things that we've already done. Let's start with Make in India. The idea that we have to turn around manufacturing in India, we have to improve infrastructure, we have to improve the policies, we have to make it possible for manufacturers to create millions and millions of jobs in manufacturing and improve the situation of electronic imports and other large-scale imports that we're doing in manufacturing. Very big idea, Make in India. Number 2, and I know this doesn't play well sometimes in Mumbai or in London or in New York, where I've spoken to a lot of investors. But let me tell you where I come from, in Latehar or in Chapra or in Simadega, these things are very important, which is what we're doing in agriculture. So the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana is the single biggest thing that we're doing right now. Because if we can get irrigation to every field in India, we are going to double or triple agricultural production. If we double or triple agricultural production, food prices come down, we increase income, we reduce inflation. This is huge. Right now I can tell you in my state, Jharkhand, which has 80% rain-fed just irrigation, and all of our crops are basically rain-fed, we get more rain than they get in Punjab. We get 3 times the amount of rain that they get in Punjab, but the agricultural production is 2 or 3 times ours, mainly because they have irrigation. So the Krishi Sinchai Yojana, where we have said that we are going to get irrigation in every field in India, and what's linked to it, which is the Deen Dayal Upadhyay electricity program, to be able to get electricity to every field, this is huge, folks. Again, as I said, this may not play well in London and New York, but it plays well in Latehar. And this is very important to Latehar, it's very important to India. The Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, the fact that we are trying to ensure that every single household in India has access to a bank account, that through that bank account they can get the benefit of, their pension payments, their various different welfare programs, and such, etc., so that we can reduce corruption leakage, extraordinarily important. This, I'm sure you will find very, very valuable to you all. The work that we're doing as far as REITs and infrastructure investment trusts are concerned. Groundbreaking stuff, hugely important. 100 smart cities. I mean, how can you say that 100 smart cities is not big ticket reform? This is huge. I mean, if we can change the quality of our cities, it will improve the urban environment that we live in, but it will be transformational in terms of infrastructure as well. How can you say that 100 smart cities is not big ticket reform? Let's talk about the financial sector. Yesterday at the Standing Committee in Finance, we spent 3 hours with Dr. Rajan and the Reserve Bank of India. Let me tell you, and let me tell you again, what is happening right now with the new monetary policy framework, the inflation targeting approach, the goal to slay the inflation dragon once and for all, is extraordinarily important for India, transformational for India. We just are taking monetary policy to a completely new paradigm. This is big ticket reform, folks. Very big ticket reform. The idea that we can have differentiated banking licenses on tap, that you can just go up to the RBI and get a full service bank license, that you can get a payment bank license, that you can get a small bank license, extraordinarily important. What we're doing with Swachh Bharat and the Ganga cleanup, 40% of India is on the Ganga in some fashion or the other, touched by the Ganga in some fashion or the other. Extraordinarily important. Of course, we're doing 49% FDI in defense and insurance. Another major reform initiative. One, I've already gone through and ticked off 8, by the way, if you're counting. Number 9, and this is something that I am very, very passionate about. The 10,000 crore fund of funds that we put together to spur a domestic venture capital industry in India. I don't know if you all know this, but 90% of India's venture capital comes from outside of India. So if you're using Flipkart, or if you've flown Indigo or used Airtel, most of that investment that went into those companies came from outside of India. So the fact that we're going to build our own domestic venture capital and private equity industry through this 10,000 crore fund of funds, again, is extraordinarily important. These are all very major, major things. And then the final thing, which is kind of an enabler for all of these, is the streamlining of governance, is what we're doing to make governance much easier, more streamlined, by putting up web portals, by ensuring that with one single form you can get all of your labor certification done and all your compliance done as far as labor is concerned. I mean, that's just one example of all the things that we're doing to streamline governance in India. These are massive, massive and very important changes. And what I will say is that these changes are not just additive. When you start working across so many different sectors and you do so many important things, you clear so much of the deadwood that's out there, the changes are not just additive. The changes become multiplicative. They truly become multiplicative. And then let's start to ask ourselves, what's going to be the impact of this? The impact of this is the following. Today we have a $2 trillion economy, right? We have a $2 trillion economy. If we can take this economy and grow it at, let's say, 7% a year for the next 10 years, we're going to double the size of this economy. Instead of a $2 trillion economy, we'll have a $4 trillion economy. And if we are going to sustain growth at that level for 10 years, you can be sure that we're going to see very strong capital flows coming into India. Right, Ashish? Wouldn't you agree with that? We're going to see very strong capital flows, whether it's FII, FDI. As a result of that, I fully expect the rupee to get much stronger over the next 10 years. We're going to have a strong rupee. Today the rupee is at 60, 61. It might very well be at 50, 55. There have been very strong inflows into India already. They will only strengthen going forward. If the rupee strengthens and goes to 50, 55, the $4 trillion economy in dollar terms could be a $5 trillion economy. A $5 trillion economy. Now here's the fun part for all of you market participants. We know that market capitalization and GDP go hand in hand, and typically their ratio has been 1:1. Today, my understanding is that the total market capitalization, public plus private, of Indian companies is about $2 trillion. It's about $2 trillion. And this has grown by $1 trillion over the last decade. In the last decade, we've added $1 trillion to market capitalization in India. Now, if we go from $2 trillion to $5 trillion in the next decade, we're going to add $3 trillion to market capitalization, to wealth creation, $3 trillion. So if we've added $1 trillion in the last decade, in the next decade we could add $3 trillion, which is 3 times the wealth that we've seen. Now of that $1 trillion, I will tell you that about 40 or 45% has been wealth that's been created in private hands. A lot of it has gone to SAIL or Coal India, etc. But 40 to 45% of it has gone into private hands, and India has created a whole host of billionaires, as you know well. Now, 3x that. Folks, that's the kind of wealth creation opportunity that's in front of us. Now, I started off my talk this evening by saying that today we've sworn in a new government in Maharashtra. The stock market has hit a new high. I think the market's telling us something. I think the market's telling us something. I think we're in for some very historic times. I think we have the wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes in front of us. And I, for one, am very excited to be here, to be standing in front of you, and to be able to serve this great country of ours, to be able to take advantage of all these great opportunities. Thank you very much. I'd love to take some questions. Abhihaya, happy to do it.
Thank you very much, sir.